Good afternoon, everyone. We are back with day 10 of our American Revolutionary story. Uh, it's a nice sunny day outside, so we're filming again outside. I hope everybody has some time to go out and enjoy the nice weather. All right, let's get into our story. The Great Race to Yorktown. The year 1781 started out badly for George Washington. In early spring, a British warship sailed up the Potomac River in Virginia and docked at Mount Vernon, Washington's beloved home. Louis Washington was there running the plantation while his cousin George was away at war. He hurried down to the dock to see what was going on. Refreshments for the enemy. When Louis Washington got down to the river, he saw that 17 slaves had already seized the chance to escape from Mount Vernon by hopping onto the British ship. Then Louis heard the British sailors calling out for service. "Bring us food and drink," they demanded, "or we'll burn the plantation." Louis did as he was told. When Washington heard the news, he didn't seem too upset that the slaves had run away, but he was horribly ashamed that his own farm had provided supplies to the invading enemy. As he told Louis, "That which gives me most concern is that you should go on board the enemy's vessel and furnish them with refreshments. It would have been a less painful circumstance to me to have heard that, and then to see my plantation burned to ruins." Another year wasted. And speaking of Washington's troubles, here was his biggest one. It was looking like 1781 was going to be another wasted year. Yet another year without a major attack on the British. At this time, Washington and his army were camped just north of New York City. So was the French army of about 4,000 men under the command of a general known to his friends as the Count. Washington had been hoping that this year, finally, the Americans and the French would launch a serious attack on the British in New York City. So Washington and the Count spent most of July looking through telescopes, studying the British forts in New York City. They were hoping to find a weak spot to attack, but there didn't seem to be a weak spot, though. Washington was used to the disappointments, but this one really got him down. How could he ever win this war? He was having a hard enough time just holding his army together. And that's when it happened. Washington suddenly saw a way to win the American Revolution. And he could do it right now. He just had to race his army 400 miles south to a place called Yorktown, Virginia. Why the race to Yorktown? That question really needs an answer. Part 1. The King tries the South. The first thing we had to do is to take a look at the things that King George was planning. Mighty Great Britain had been fighting these pesky Americans since 1775, and all they had to show for it was control of New York City. The war was costing Britain a fortune, so the government had to raise taxes. King George was feeling the heat. More and more people in Britain were sick of the war. They wanted to bring the army home and forget the whole thing. But you know George. He was still absolutely committed to victory over the Americans. So, starting in 1779, the king decided to try a new strategy. The British army would destroy the revolution by capturing the southern states. The famously stubborn King George honestly believed that most people in the South were still loyal to him. Part 2. Bad peaches, bad generals. At first, it looked like Britain's southern strategy was actually going to work. The British quickly captured big chunks of Georgia and South Carolina. Then, Congress put Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, in charge of the American army in the South. Gates showed up in camp in July of 1780 and saw that his soldiers were starving and exhausted. So, what did he decide to do? He ordered them to march right toward the British. Hungry enough to eat anything, the men spotted unripened green peaches growing along the road. They feasted and quickly paid the price. The meal had painful effects. Let's just say the peaches didn't stay in those hungry bellies for very long. Gates pushed his weakened soldiers on. and on August 16th, they ran into the British General Charles Cornwallis and his army at Camden, South Carolina. While Cornwallis was crushing the Americans, General Gates panicked and fled from the battle, leaving his entire army behind. He was next seen 180 miles away. Was there ever an instance of a general running away as Gates has done? From the whole army, wondered Alexander Hamilton, Washington's young assistant. So far, so good, thought the king. Part 3. British behaving badly. If only the king knew how badly some of the soldiers were behaving in the South. One morning in 1780, a frightened girl came running up to Eliza Wilkinson's South Carolina home. "Oh, the king's people are coming," shouted the girl. "It must be them, for they are all in red." Moments later, Eliza saw a group of British soldiers riding up on horse. "Where's these women rebels?" they cried, waving their swords and pistols. The soldiers jumped off their horses, ran into the house, and started stealing stuff, jewelry, clothes, pretty much anything that wasn't nailed down. Then one of the soldiers saw the silver buckles of Eliza's shoes. "I want them buckles," said he, and immediately knelt to her feet and took them off. A few minutes later, it was all over. Eliza watched the British soldiers ride off, their shirts bulging with loot. Part 4. The Swamp Fox. That brings us to South Carolina patriot named Francis. Francis started leading small bands of militiamen on quick, surprising strikes against British soldiers. Francis would march them through the night, attack sleepy British soldiers at dawn, then disappear into the forests and swamps using paths and hiding places the British could never find. Francis never encamped over 2 nights in one place, said another general from the American Continental Army. The British hated Francis, but they couldn't help respecting his creative and daring style. They even gave him a nickname, the Swamp Fox. Even Continental Army soldiers hardly ever got a good look at the Swamp Fox. When the British general met Francis and his swamp team, he was surprised to see a bunch of hungry-looking men in rags. Their numbers did not exceed 20 men and boys, said Williams. Some white, some black, and all mounted on horses, but most of them miserably equipped. Miserably equipped, but very effective. With folks like the Swamp Fox around, the British Army was never able to gain control of the South. Part 5. Fight, lose, fight again. General Nathan Greene took command of the American Army in the South at the end of 1780, and like the Swamp Fox, Greene knew how to use geography to his advantage. His strategy was simple. We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again. Doesn't exactly sound like a formula to win, does it? Well, actually, it was brilliant. Greene knew his small army wasn't strong enough to actually beat the British, so instead he decided to lead the enemy on a long and tiring chase all over the vast landscape of North and South Carolina. Once in a while he turned and fight a small battle, and he didn't mind losing these fights because he knew he was wearing the British down. Don't get the idea that Greene's army was having a great time though. Facing the usual Continental Army food shortages, the soldiers ate frogs, alligators, or anything else that they could catch and cook. And with all the marching and camping, the men were completely through their clothes by the end of summer. But being in the South, at least it was warm. Part 6. Cornwallis gets tired. Over in the British camp, Greene's strategy was having its intended effect. At first, General Charles Cornwallis was determined to catch up to Greene. He ordered his men to toss away all their extra supplies, tents, clothing, even barrels of rum. He hoped this would let his army move much, much faster. But Greene always managed to stay a few steps ahead of Cornwallis, and by the summer of 1781, Cornwallis was frustrated, angry, and exhausted. He reported, "With a third of my army sick and wounded, the remainder without shoes and worn down with fatigue, I thought it was time to look for some place of peace and rest." So, Cornwallis decided to push his army north. Maybe he hoped the British would have better luck in Virginia. Part 7. Spying on Cornwallis. Soon after the British entered Virginia, a 21-year-old named James Armistead decided to help kick them out. But first, he had to get permission from his owner. Armistead was held as a slave on a farm in Williamsburg. The owner agreed, and Armistead marched to the American camp. Armistead met a young French general, Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette explained that what the army really needed was more information about the locations and the movements of General Cornwallis's army. Would Armistead be willing to take a massive risk to get this information? A few days later, Armistead walked into General Cornwallis's camp and told British soldiers he had just escaped slavery and was looking to earn some cash. Well, the British put him to work. The young guy proved to be very useful to the British. His detailed knowledge of the local geography helped the soldiers find their way around. All the while, James Armistead was sending reports back to Lafayette in the American camp. Then Armistead took an even bigger risk. He gained the trust of General Cornwallis and took the job of Cornwallis's personal writer. This was the perfect position for a spy. Serving food and walking around the dinner table, Armistead was able to see and hear everything that went on in Cornwallis's own tent. Armistead always had a hard time getting a close look at official maps and plans because Cornwallis was so careful with his papers. As Lafayette explained, "His Lordship Cornwallis is so shy of his papers that my honest friends say he cannot get them at all." Armistead kept working though, and he kept feeding badly needed information to Lafayette. This helped the Americans keep a close watch on Cornwallis as he marched his army around Virginia. But exactly where was Cornwallis headed? Part 8. Pick a port, any port. The truth is, even Cornwallis didn't know. All summer long, he exchanged angry letters with General Henry Clinton, the British commander in New York City. Like most top British generals in the war, these two guys couldn't stand each other. Clinton wanted Cornwallis to come north to New York, but he was sure Washington was about to attack him there. Cornwallis wanted Clinton to come south to Virginia because he was convinced the British could capture this very important state. They finally agreed on a compromise. Cornwallis would take control of the port town on the Virginian coast. That way, British ships could move soldiers quickly from New York to Virginia. So Cornwallis started looking for a good port. He picked a tiny town near the Chesapeake Bay. Welcome to Yorktown, General Cornwallis. Part 9. The French sail north. Now, there's just one last piece of the Yorktown puzzle. As Cornwallis was settling in at Yorktown, a fleet of French warships started sailing north from the Caribbean Sea. The commander of the fleet, the Count, thought he might be able to help with the war. His destination, the Chesapeake Bay. Alright, so that's where we're going to stop. In today's read aloud, it set up the story of how the Americans are going to come to end up winning this war. And the British have made some serious mistakes as they try to take the town of Yorktown. So in tomorrow's read aloud, we will see what happens and see how this battle plays out. Have a nice day and get outside. We'll see ya. Bye.